motorists, ensure safe and effective traffic flow and management, prevent primary and secondary collisions. That means people that are actually in the parade, I'm trying to prevent them from colliding with each other, as well as other motorists that are observing the parade as it goes by, preventing those collisions off on the secondary streets. Protecting city property and assets and promoting awareness for the event. So this was the historical route that the Abate Parade and the Baca Parade have both used. It measures in at 10.6 miles. It's about 30 years old. When this event started 30 years ago, the east side of town was not nearly as busy as it is today. There were not as many businesses over there, not as much traffic. Second in Wyoming has become the busiest intersection in the entire state of Wyoming. CY and Poplar, it falls right up in the top 10, as well as First and Poplar falls in the top 10 as the busiest intersections in the state of Wyoming as well. So those intersections in themselves are extremely problematic. The other problem with this former parade route was that they left our jurisdiction, went into Mills, and then re-entered our jurisdiction. So to provide parade security for that parade was problematic as far as jurisdictional boundaries went. If they wanted to do this parade route today, it would have been a minimum of 10 officers, and I would agree with the chief that we would actually need more, like all of our officers, to staff that parade route and make it as safe as possible to get them from point A to point B, and that's just not technically possible. Minimum of $1,500 in staffing costs if the event were to only run an hour and a half at 10 officers. This was the Baca parade that we did last fall, the toy run. We had entered into our discussions about the length of the parade route that they wanted that time. The starting point was also the east side Walmart, and they ended at Butch's Bar in Evansville. We had 8 major intersections that we crossed at that time. It was a 30-minute run time. I was able to do it with 4 officers at $360. So huge savings in money, huge savings in staffing, because we took that route from 10.6 miles down to 5.27 miles and crossed a lot fewer major intersections. We did still cross Second in Wyoming, and that was problematic because, again, it was at noon on a Saturday, so we had all that lunch traffic out there and shopping traffic, so that was highly problematic. This was my first experience with a parade of this type. So at that time, going through that intersection, I just noticed that we needed to possibly not go through that intersection in the future because it was so problematic. This was Mileage's application for this year's parade and the map that he requested. You notice that he says that he cut down 2/3 of the route. When I map it out on my map, it actually cut off about 40% of the previous route, and still had a lot of, we had 16 major intersections, 10 officers minimum, $1,500 staffing cost for that. I proposed that they start at the Sunrise Shopping Center and work their way down Poplar and end at the Harley Shop. That would have cost only 5 major intersections, would have taken me 6 officers to staff, $400 in cost to do that. Their complaint was that they'd already published the event, that the starting point was at the east side Walmart and the ending point was at the Harley Shop. This was just days now away from the event. So we compromised, kind of made a combination of that route and the Baca route, cut it down to 4.79 miles. That's a 60% reduction in the original route. Staffing cost was $520. I want to echo what Mr. Napier said, that this is traditionally something that we provide to these citizens for free. We don't charge them for that, but we do still have staffing costs that we have to pay our officers. Going through that, we did have a major impact at 2nd and Wyoming Boulevard. I was at the rear of the parade, the safety at the rear. Traffic was backed up in all 4 directions as far as I could see. The parade itself occupied approximately 0.6 miles in length, so when they were crossing 2nd and Country Club, I was still at Old Chicago. So it was quite a lengthy parade. The average intersection clearance from the time we occupied that intersection to the time it was cleared was 6 minutes. We had several traffic control issues, and again, it was a weekday noon traffic. 2nd and Wyoming Boulevard, my community service officers that were blocking traffic there experienced people driving out of the queue or out of the lineup and trying to drive into the procession of motorcycles or cross the street even though they were blocking traffic. And they had to physically step out in front of motorists to prevent them from doing that, putting themselves in danger. First in Poplar, we had essentially the same issue. Because of construction there, it slowed the procession way down. It took an actual 7.5 minutes to clear that intersection. And again, motorists were trying to drive around the queue and edge into the intersection to get through because they were being impatient with the parade length.
So, thank you.
Yeah.
Let me discuss hopefully you understand the need for us to not allow this to go on for 12 miles. It taps all of our resources, and even then we cannot meet the safety demands of that. When it comes to the discussion of colors, I'm going to walk a very fine line here. I'm going to be forthright with the fact that the Casper Police Department has been receiving intelligence from trusted, reputable federal, state, and local resources for about the last 6 months, indicating a projected increase of outlaw motorcycle gang activity specific to Casper. That was followed up by very specific information about potential acts of violence that has been planned and activated upon, and that very specific information that a traditional name that most of the room would recognize, outlaw motorcycle gang, was planning to announce publicly the establishment of a chapter of their organization in Casper and to hold what is called their patching ceremony, their patching announcement. Historically, I have personal experience with these. Those are very problematic for police encounters during that time period. I was of the opinion that I didn't want our parade, the Abate Motorcycle Safety and Awareness Parade, to become the venue by which they chose to announce that. Given the fact that we had specific information that another territorial claim from another group, and essentially that they had committed to acts of violence to stop this, we did not want that to happen here. So, to that end, we respectfully and very professionally requested of the Abate permittees that if this is about motorcycle safety and awareness, that there's no need to take advantage of the outlaw motorcycle gangs wearing their colors and making it their event. It was not a demand, it was just simply a request. We explained the reasonings behind it. We're trying to promote and support your safety awareness campaign. So we voluntarily asked for them to we would appreciate it if you could make that happen. They're the ones that chose to, we even acknowledge it's your First Amendment right, see what we're trying to accomplish. They're the ones that chose to make this into what it was not, that the police department was banning it. We were never banning it. That was not the case. Did I adequately state that?
Absolutely, sir.
The police department, in my opinion, was abundantly judicious in all of this, even to the point where we allowed them, using our own police vehicle PA system, to disparage us and loudly proclaim that we weren't supporting them. As we stood there in mass, facilitating the parade, in using our PA system to say those things, and yet we patiently stood by and allowed that to happen. I think we acted with professionalism. This was not an attack on the biker culture. The police department has public safety goals we're trying to reach, and I think we were judiciously applying the information and the knowledge we had, combined with the reality of supplying a multi-mile parade route to help them. We believe that we provided a professional service to them, and their concerns, though loudly voiced, we reasonably tried to provide for those concerns. Questions?
Questions for Chief, or for Sergeant Bullard, or for Mr. Constantino about insurance matters? Chris?
There's not a problem here. The issue was handled by the police department. No one was forced to take off colors. There was a compromise made on the distance of the route. Insurance is a commonly paid thing. Sorry you had to spend so much time rationalizing your decision. We don't want to promote outlaw bikers either, so.
Mike?
I agree with Councilman Walsh. I don't see a real problem here, and specifically with reference to the insurance business. Having been involved through the Lions Club with the Central Wyoming Fair Parade for over 40 years, and having been the chairman of that group, I'm very aware that over the years there has indeed been a requirement of insurance. We never had to worry about that because we were sponsored by the Fair Board, which was a governmental entity, and so, you know, there was that. But I was certainly always aware of that, you know, as far back as 30 or 40 years ago, that the city had their interests in making sure that things were insured properly. So I think that's just a complete misunderstanding on their part, thinking that was something new.
Questions, comments?
Not that I disagree with either of you two at all, just a few questions. One, can anybody tell me when the application was submitted, the route was submitted? Was it, I heard 2 weeks, or not even 2 weeks, you got word of the route a few days before the actual route, is that correct?
The actual application was received to me on April 9th, so they had just a little bit under a month. And during those weeks leading up to it, I met several times with Mileage Mike Harrison, trying to nail down the route, which we weren't able to do until the week before, because he was not willing to compromise very easily. And then the insurance requirement pushed them to just within a few days of the actual event of getting their insurance input into the application process. So,
Okay, that's what I wanted to double check. And then my other question is for them to get insurance, what does that cover? What is if they apply for insurance for a parade, what is the insurance for? What's the purpose of it?
Would be to cover anything that happened while they were conducting this event. So they would typically get general liability and also auto liability coverage. So if somebody crossed the intersection and caused an accident, or some biker lost control of his bike and crashed into something and injured 3 people, that policy would pick up stuff like that.
But if they have insurance on all their bikes, that doesn't cover any of it?
I can't speak to what their personal policies would cover, but run into 2 things. One, you have to verify that they actually have coverage, it's in force and hasn't lapsed. And 2, oftentimes you might run into a limits issue where people are getting the minimum insurance, which is ridiculously low here. It wouldn't cover hardly anything.
Okay.
The minimum is it a minimum requirement? The limits issue, typically it's $1 million in general liability that we would require.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No.
Mayor, with your permission, I would, generally speaking, for an injury accident involving a trip to the ER, and you wouldn't make it out of the first day of the ER and ICU before you'd reached the medical limit of most single vehicle insurance policies in the state of Wyoming. You would use up that, and the rest of it would not be covered by the end of that first 24 hours. A personal opinion.
The only other question I have, I guess, to prevent is there a way to prevent this from the chaos happening or something like this to happen? Is there something we can do to help ease any parade that takes place?
Mayor, Council, I would tell you that the event planning guide that was commissioned by the council is immense help to the city staff when preparing for. I think that provides a lot of guidance to us. We were acting on best interests of the event planning guide, and seems like we lost control of the dialogue once they started, spinning it. I'm looking for the right words here because I'm not looking to continue a drama behind this, but the characterization of things were banned and the police department's not supportive and so forth and so on. That's somewhat outside of our control. We have dutifully reached out to them multiple times, very professional in our explanations and our requests, working collaboratively with our community members to pull off a successful event.
Other questions or comments?
I just have one question on the event itself, the packet. When we had discussions about the change on the alcohol ordinance and tips training, was that ever put in here so that people doing events know that they need to have that training in place?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Friel, I would say probably not, because the event guide was published before the ordinance was enacted, and so that's certainly an amendment we can make.
I would just suggest that maybe it's
Probably
in
not a
there
bad
so
idea.
that they're
Yeah.
aware of that.
Not a bad idea at all.
I guess the only thing I would say in retrospect, in hindsight, it's always 20/20 on these things, is, as this whole thing evolved with the distortions that were happening, and obviously happening in social media, and I think it's healthy to get what the real story of what's happened out into the public, because there is so much misinformation that's been spread around. It seemed like there were events that took place that led to this conclusion that you had banned the colors, and people of course were saying, I have a POW and MIE jacket and I can't wear that at the parade. And there was a lot of controversy about the route, and it might have been healthy to have talked about all of these things as we were leading up to the event, given that there was a lot of ingredients for controversy developing. And I don't know how we would have arranged that, but so that we would have gotten our story out before it took on all of this momentum.
Mayor, thank you for the council. We'll certainly pay attention to that. You'll notice we did, as soon as we got wind that things were being misinterpreted, we did do press conferences and releases and news releases, to try to provide the information out there that we needed to get out there. We were responding to it. Sometimes things can develop and that hurricane starts blowing before we were even aware of it. So we were responding as fast as we could, but if we had more time, I've elapsed all of my time. Sergeant Bullard could better describe the actual conversations, the actual information. There was plenty of communication, but if they refuse to hear and are only hearing what they want to hear out of that, it's very difficult for us. So without making excuses, we're getting much better at responding to these on a timely basis.
Just trying to learn from things as best we can. I mean, I don't question any of your decisions or actions either, just to be clear on that. But I think it was good to take this time to say, here's what really happened, folks. Ken?
Last question, and I don't mean to start a hornet nest on this one, so I hope it doesn't. But you mentioned that you got intel of possible negative biker affiliations was coming into Casper or establishing here. Have you seen that with the intel? Has your officers ran into that it is here, or is that just still intel that we think it's going to be?
Yes, we have confirmed our intelligence. We're as the police department, we're.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, Ken, we'd probably better leave that to the chief in tactical operations instead of public information.
Fair enough. Yep. Thank you, Chief. Any other questions for these folks? Thank you for coming up, Mr. Constantino. Okay. Appreciate the explanation. Okay. I guess we can move on to food trailers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question at debate this evening is with regard to whether or not to amend the ordinance surrounding food truck regulation to include trailers. And fundamentally, the issue behind the question is whether or not you want that application of safety to be applied to those kinds of kitchens, whether they be as a part of a motorized vehicle or as a part of a non-motorized trailer. certainly we are prepared to talk about the conversations that we've had with the one vendor, Blackbird Pizza, and walk through those details if council would like. But at the end of the day, we just simply need to know whether or not council's comfortable with the safety recommendation that we're suggesting. One of the things that seems to be confusing to me at least is with regard to the nuances of a commercial kitchen and whether or not it is a commercial kitchen in a food truck capacity. The thing that I've found, having become quite expert unwittingly in food trucks over the last 18 months, is that some of these food trucks can be quite elaborate. And that elaborateness isn't relegated to only motorized vehicles, but indeed it can be a fifth wheel, kind of pull behind trailer. And I had no idea before getting into this dialogue that that was the case. We certainly have seen very, very nice trailers that could easily double as a commercial kitchen in any application, almost like a federal relief type portable kitchen that you see out there on disaster sites and so forth. Which is why I think some people get into the business actually. So my question is whether or not the issue of requiring a vehicle to have that type of fire protection is any different than requiring a trailer that can be as nice or nicer, having the same kinds of precautions. And that's what we need to know at the end of the day. Hopefully we've been able to eliminate the question as it relates to push carts and open air trailers with the information you received over the weekend. We do not believe sunshades constitute an enclosure requiring a Type 1 hood.
We impose this code onto a mobile food truck, and all we're doing is making it uniform to a trailer. The only thing absent is a motor. And I'm not going to pretend that I do know what all the fire code, what the background for the purpose of the fire code is, or what happens. I assume buildup of grease-laden vapors above the roof can cause a flashover fire if there was enough heat or something like that. And then you've got the people inside the truck and anything around it. I know that a regular truck has to have one. It only seems that it should be consistent with a trailer. And since I'm not an expert in this area, I have to rely on our firemen to make that judgment call. So I support making it uniform.
Mike?
Mr. Mayor, 2 points. One, just in case anybody doesn't think that this is an important issue, Google fire food truck explosions, and there are some pretty impressive fires that you'll see. And so I think it is some. I can't speak for anybody else, but speaking for myself, it just, we use the term food truck generically almost to describe any kind of food preparation vehicle. It just didn't dawn on me that when we were doing this last year, to go in and say this includes trailers and other things. I just it didn't occur to me, and I don't think it occurred to most anybody else. And so I think all we're trying to do is just make it consistent across the board for all of these various kinds of vehicles and everything. And I think we should move forward with this. And in case you don't think it's a safety issue, like I say, just Google that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm just kind of the same position as Chris and Mike, following the consistency, number one, but more importantly, the recommendations from professionals that know and understand that. And I know in restaurants, there's certain regulations and things you have to follow for safety, and I think that it's important for us to be uniform. So I support this.
Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's important here to note that the use of hoods is different depending on what's being cooked inside. It's pretty clear to me after literally spending some time on the internet looking at some of these pizza ovens, that they are designed not to have a hood. And in fact, it is a negative thing. Well, they couldn't do what they want to do. But you can still have the same pizza oven in your house. You go to the same organization that this guy has brought to our attention, you can buy that in your house, and you don't have to have a hood over that oven. It's a direct vent oven and designed from the ground up to be that. However, in the video, one of the videos of one of the organizations that's selling this thing, they've got this sitting in a commercial kitchen. You've got the oven sitting here, the pizza oven sitting here. It's direct vent, and it's designed from the ground up to be direct vent. To the right, you see a grill, a regular oven, or regular grill that's in a restaurant to cook hamburgers. It does have to have that hood. And so I think we're being, even with what we amended as of last week, if they build a truck with one of these pizza ovens that's designed from the ground up to be direct vent, to put a hood on it defeats the purpose of the hood. So I think we need to be a little careful how we do this. I still think we don't need to put it on a hot dog cart or anything like that, but we still have the vehicle included in there. If the vehicle's designed from the ground up to have one of these wood-fired ovens, if you will, and it's designed from the ground up to be a direct vent, I don't think that's right either. So.
That was that was my question. Is when they're manufactured, aren't they manufactured according to a fire code already? I mean,
Yes.
So what's? I guess that's my question. Why are we requiring additional? Because I mean, that was the argument that one of the vendors said was, you know, my trailer is designed to be safe. It meets whatever code that they have to follow to build the thing, and that adding this additional feature would put them out of business if the argument, I don't know that it would or not.
Mr. Mayor, if I might,
Steve, were you waiting?
Go ahead.
I'd like to,
Come back to me.
you know, what we're talking about here is making an ordinance so that the standard applies to all of these different kinds of mobile kitchens. That's a different issue than someone having a fuss with the fire department that they think that the fire department's mistakenly applying a code or something. And so I'd like to suggest that we just stay focused on this, and that we not go down the rabbit hole about, well, is this going to affect this guy's thing, because that's a different issue than what the ordinance should say. Should the ordinance apply to trucks and trailers, or just to trucks?
Well, agreed, but if we could have a separate discussion about Bob's question at a later time. Seems like it's on the agenda now. Steve, what'd you have to say?
Well, so that's kind of my point. I think that we should be consistent across the board. However, in having discussions with Josh that has the pizza oven, the manufacturer has built it to where it doesn't need a hood, and in fact has gone to the point of saying that if you put a hood on it, whoever puts that on is going to be responsible when a fire breaks out. So I think my question really is, they are two separate issues, but as far as Josh's go with the pizza oven, there's got to be some sort of a test, and if I read that right in the, I'm sure you'll find it for me there, but there's got to be some sort of a test to be able to say when there's too many grease-laden vapors, or when something's put off enough that it would require that hood to be put in place, and has that test been done with the pizza oven to determine whether or not that hood needs to be put in place?
Are we all in agreement that we should move forward with an ordinance that basically makes no distinction between trailers and trucks that are food preparation vehicles? Because that is the item before us, and then we can have this discussion if we all agree to move forward with that. Okay? All right, so now let's Chris?
What's our appeal process if fire department says no? What's a person's recourse for?
That's a good question too. I think a couple other people are waiting. Let's just kind of file these questions because they're all good questions. Kristen, what do you have to say?
I was just going to point out really quick, they are actually related because the attorney says in the letter, basically that they weren't going to move forward with him until this ordinance was passed, which indicates that they are tied together. As far as us passing this ordinance affected him getting a permit to operate this year.
Of course, he was exempt because he was a trailer. until we make this change, right? So,
Yeah, if you had a motor on a trailer, then it would, yeah.
well, so the questions, Chief, would you be prepared to talk to us a little bit about, open vented, is that what you're calling them, Bob? Open vented, pizza ovens and the safety issues and why, to, Vice Mayor Johnson's question, why are they being allowed to be manufactured this way if they're not safe?
Sure. Mayor and council members, I'll get the conversation started. It's a little bit more complex. Obviously, this is new across the country for every community with trucks and trailers setting up as food service kitchens. As far as some of the comments, again, I haven't seen the video you're referring to, but not knowing what building that is, I'd venture to guess it probably had a full building suppression system, and maybe that's why they didn't require anything for the wood stove part, but did for the other cooking device that they had. I don't know on that. As far as the manufacturer's concerned on all of these, I mean, they make them for existing buildings, I assume trailers, trucks. So and I'll have Ryan Neff, our community risk officer, kind of follow up on this, is the manufacturers will also be very quick to say that this is what we require for our stove. However, local jurisdiction and fire codes will supersede it. And again, that's where we're taking the approach that what we put in place for the food trucks should apply to the food trailers as far as fire and life safety. We can't determine what they're going to cook in that trailer, in that oven. They say pizza, but it could turn into other items that are going to create more smoke and grease-laden vapors that come out into the trailer. It does not have a fire suppression system in it. So there's multiple things that our folks have to evaluate when we look at whether it's a truck or a trailer and what device they have in there. So I guess, and again, there's going to be different codes across all the country, and we want to put in place what's best for, I guess, Casper and our safety of our citizens and our business owners. So with that, I'll let Ryan kind of get into maybe the manufacture of this device. But again, that's where they sell their stove and then leave it to the local jurisdictions to ultimately say yes or no, this has to be further protected. So you might kind of get on the manufacturer.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, thanks for the opportunity to speak on this issue. First of all, I'd like to say I had conversations with Mr. Barhog starting March 27th of 2018. He sent me specifications for his food trailer. And I replied the 28th telling him that he would require a Type 1 hood with suppression before his trailer was built. So I just want to make it clear that we were upfront with him. I researched a whole bunch of codes in this process. This is actually the specifications from his pizza oven, and I don't know, you can pass it around, and there's kind of a little, sorry it's so small, I couldn't get it to blow up, but basically it states that it can be direct vented, but it's up to the local authority having jurisdiction. And so, with that said, the majority of the pizza ovens trailers that they use are open air, and so we're saying that we're not going to regulate those, and they can be direct vented, and that's fine.
Meaning that even the opening of the stove is out in the open, not
Right,
enclosed.
correct. So then, with all this going on, I was like, I want to make sure that I'm right, you know. So I contacted the International Code Council, who actually writes the fire code, the mechanical code, all of our codes that we adopted, and I got a formal interpretation from them, which took months, and that this is the reply for a solid fuel cooking pizza oven, basically, and whether it requires a Type 1 hood. And they said, basically their response back was, it does, no matter what they cook in it, it does. It's called an extra heavy duty cooking appliance, and so it requires it no matter what. And it's changed, so Rocca's, Firehouse Pizza have come up. Those were under different codes. I don't know what codes they were under when they were built. It was a different inspector, but I will say that if they do some renovations on those places, they we will be looking at those, and they may be required to have a Type 1 hood installed over them. All the pizza oven manufacturers I've found can have a Type 1 hood installed over them. There's a little confusion on it, and I think Josh has a hard time with it because he was thinking that it was going to have fire suppression in the actual pizza oven, which would essentially destroy it if there was a fire in there and it went off. It's actually installed over the opening of the front. So anything that escapes out of the front, if that catches on fire, there's a suppression system that puts that fire out, protecting any employees that are in that food truck and putting the fire out. So this is the actual installation guide from his pizza oven. And there's a section marked in here for the installation of a Type 1 hood and how to install a Type 1 hood over his oven. So it can be done. So it's just basically up to the local authority having jurisdiction and what their ruling is on it. So are there any questions?
Questions for Ryan? Ken?
I don't have a question, but I went through the codes as well today. I spent probably an hour on looking up the codes, each one that you're talking about, how they're supposed to be designed and everything. And I gotta say, you're absolutely right, which of course you would be because you're supposed to know that stuff. But I just wanted to double check that what it was actually saying was specific and everything. And I don't see an issue what you guys are asking at all. You're absolutely right.
Thank you.
Chris?
Is there some kind of measurement or threshold that you can determine on that, or is it just in general? If it can produce this, then?
No, basically, well, so there is an exception that for grease-laden vapors, like the question you brought up. There's nothing for solid fuel cooking appliances that basically if they're cooking with it, like I said, it has to have a Type 1 hood. If it's an electric appliance and it produces, and I think I wrote it in the memo, that affluent of 5 millimeters mercury, some crazy number that a testing laboratory can produce for us, if they can give us that information, then it would not require a Type 1 hood.
But you guys don't have a field test where you can go in?
No.
Okay.
No.
Ryan, do you have any idea when these regulations were added to the International Fire Code?
I do not.
It's been a while, it's not a
Yeah,
recent thing.
they have been in there for a while, yeah. They have made changes, not corrections, changes to it,
Mhm.
the wording and the exceptions but yeah, I think it's been in there for a while.
Chris?
Mostly just a point of clarification for me, because you kind of mentioned something about Rockas and you said, well, codes change. So with restaurants, is it just when they're built, they're subject to code at that time?
Thank you for bringing that up, yes.
Because then are food trucks subject to it on a faster pace then?
So the way they wrote the code in the 2018 International Fire Code for the food trucks is that they have to receive an operational permit. The way we've done it is that they're basically an annual permit, so they're gonna get a 1-year permit, and they have to be inspected every year and get this operational permit, and they have to basically go through all the safety requirements. A restaurant, it's a little different, so basically once they get their certificate of occupancy, if something changes, basically like they do a remodel of some sort, then we can make them come up to the current standard codes. So like, for instance, McDonald's right now on Wyoming Boulevard is remodeling. And so they didn't have a fire suppression system in their building, and we are requiring them to put one in now. So that's where, if they do that remodel, then yeah, they have to come up to those current codes.
But there are fire suppression systems designed specifically for this kind of
Yeah, they make them for
application.
the hood, it's specifically for it.
And Mr. Barhog was aware of that.
Yep.
He was also aware that the Type 1 hoods were designed for this type of application and it could have been included in his design.
Yep.
Okay. Mike?
Mr. Mayor, I think that Councilman Walsh did ask a good question when he asked about what the appeal mechanism is if a citizen business owner honestly thinks that you guys have made a mistake. And I would defer to Mr. Henley on this, but I would think that would be an appeal much like a zoning board of adjustment appeal, that would ultimately in some manner come to the council, or is there any appeal to it?
There would be no appeal that we have currently, except if they came to the council and asked for an ordinance change.
Okay.
Bob, and then Ken.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would only ask to take this from an engineering standpoint, and I say that only because I am one. If you put a hood in front of this thing that has a negative pressure, you are ruining the draft capability of the direct vent system. You may in fact aggravate the fire. If there's a big fire and something explodes inside there, you're gonna have ash coming out this way instead of going up the flue. And I just think really bad judgment, quite honestly. I think this has been designed from the ground up to be direct vent, and it's safer that way. You cook a pizza in your fireplace, you're gonna get a hood. We have a lot of houses in town, and I know of one specifically that had one of these ovens put in, there is no vent required. Because the draft is up. You always wanna have the draft going out the right place. To put a hood in front of it that's sucking this fire out of it is just wrong. I'm sorry.
I think Ken was waiting.
Two things real quick. One, when I was reading through that, isn't there 3 different types of ventilation you can have regarding it? I thought there was 3 different, you have the hood, but it could go 3 different things, I thought. I wish I would have kept it up, so.
Sorry, I'm not aware of what you're talking about.
Okay,
You're saying type 1 and type 2 type hoods?
no, not type hoods, but how it's vented. So
So
like.
a direct vent or a non-direct vent or a hood system, type 1 hood?
Correct.
For the manufacturer?
Right.
Correct.
That's what I was thinking of. But my second which, if we go through this and a trailer does not have it, they cannot produce food, correct?
Yeah, basically what we would tell them, and so I had someone come up to the event center at one of the events they had up there one year, and they didn't have a type 1 hood, and they actually contacted a local contractor here in town, and it wasn't for a pizza oven, but it was, they just didn't have a type 1 hood that they were required to have, and so they had one installed that day, and they actually sold food for the rest of the event.
But you have to have it if we pass this through
Correct.
by law.
If they produce grease bagels.
Right.
Yep.
Oh.
Before we go to you, Steve, Ryan, did you have something you wanted to add to the question about the appeal process?
Yeah, so in the International Fire Code, there's
I'll
actually
get
an
to you,
appeal
Steve.
process that people can file through the International Fire Code, so they can actually contact them and appeal a decision that an inspector makes. So there is a process that they can go through for that.
And who does that appeal go to, the
Mike.
chief or the?
I don't know, I'd have to read through that process, but it is in the
Sorry,
International
Steve.
Fire Code.
waiting. Go ahead, Steve.
No, the only question I had is, you said if it requires, the type of food they're preparing requires to have a hood, then they'll need to have a hood, but if I heard you right, you're not controlling, you don't know what they're cooking, so if they go in and cook something else that would require it, I mean, how is that gonna be? How are you gonna police that?
So basically, if they have like deep fryers or a griddle or anything that they could basically cook something, even a stovetop where they could cook something like that in there, then we would require them to have a type 1 hood to basically cover, and say you cook anything now, you're basically covered to cook anything. If they don't want to have, if they have an oven, like a convection oven or something like that, and basically there's a lot of churches and things that do that, they're like, we don't want to put in a type 1 hood, but we want to cook stuff. We're like, you can use a convection oven that contains it all in that oven, and they're not required to have a type 1 hood then.
When we have an appeal process, I understand you can do one through the National Fire Code. If we've got a code enforcement problem that doesn't meet planning and zoning, then it's basically appealed to us. It would seem to me like maybe we should talk about this in the future about a local appeal oversight. Because I'm sure that they're following exactly what the National Fire Code says, and so that's not gonna pass muster. And it shouldn't if it was appealed to us, but I think that option should exist where there's a local face to it, and I think ultimately our responsibility.
That's something we could talk about. Chief, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, Mayor and Councilmember, again, and I defer to legal, but I believe we would have to actually put in the structure to go from the fire code to the city council to engage that process. That's my belief, is whether it's a resolution or an ordinance
to
that
actually
gives
change-
that link and
change the
nexus to
rules.
fire code for those appeal processes. That's my experience in other parts of the country.
To tread very carefully with these health and safety issues as opposed to,
Right.
what kind of building is next to you,
Right.
sort of zoning. Well, okay, did everybody get all their questions answered? I don't think we have an action to take here, Kristen.
I just had a few other quick questions that aren't necessarily like hood related. Because I know that in the correspondence, it had said that, you know, we can't issue your permit until this ordinance is passed or not passed. That applies to all food trailers then, I'm assuming? So I guess I just want to make it confirmed that no other food trailers were issued permits before the passing of this ordinance? Or was it just this specific food trailer?
I don't know the answer to
Sorry,
that.
I don't know who to direct that
Do
to.
we know if other trailers have?
Mr. Mayor, Mrs. Councilman, so kind of what happened in this whole process, how this whole thing got started, is that we started the process with him. We had been, our department has been inspecting food trucks, food trailers, everything for years. And then we started dealing with some people last year after Josh's thing came out. And another food truck actually came into our community and said, you guys don't have regulations to do anything, regulate anything on our food truck. Because in the 2015 fire code, there was actually nothing stated that we could enforce or regulate per the fire code. So that's
Because it was a trailer.
no, they didn't even have
Oh,
food trucks in
before
the
that,
15.
okay.
So when we adopted the 18 code is when food trucks came in, and that's when we contacted some of our local law enforcement folks, and we were like, the definition of this mobile food preparation vehicles, they're like, vehicles have to have an engine. Well, we're like, trailers aren't included there. Well, we found out in the 15 code that we didn't have authority to, and that's where this amendment came from, to try to get everybody to where we could basically try to make everybody as safe as possible. And so that's why, at that point, we signed that gray slip. The gray slip is a health department slip, so basically that's a health license. So when we signed that, and Mr. Henley advised me to sign it provisionally, that basically was because we didn't have the regulation to do anything for permit wise. Since that point, we have not issued a permit to any trailer since then. The fire department hasn't been included, the building department, the electrical inspectors, none of us have been included on any trailer since then.
So this council has already adopted the 2018 International Fire Code. And that is what is in place, and that is what you good folks are entrusted to enforce as things stand. So absent some other action, that's where we would leave it. So I guess if someone wants to propose that we amend the ordinance that adopted the fire code, they can certainly do so. But without taking some action, our fire folks did exactly what they were supposed to do, is what it sounds like. So anybody want to propose that we make some kind of change? I guess not hearing anything. I think we appreciate the information and we move on from here. Did you have something else you want to say about this, Chris?
Just quickly, because this has kind of become a very public conversation of, the perception is that food trucks are going to start refusing to do business in Casper, and most of which have already made the statement that they will not come here. And I mean, they'll choose other communities over us if the opportunity presents itself. So I didn't know, maybe we could ask other communities in Wyoming if this is happening to them, or why is the perception that it's so much more restricted here than somewhere else? because most communities have adopted the International Fire Code. I guess my point is, I think this is something we really need to get ahead of before it becomes a thing of Casper is not food truck friendly, and it becomes just an absolute narrative and it takes over.
My reaction is, I think it's similar to having the chief discuss what really happened with the motorcycle rally and the motorcycle parade, so that we can say, these are the steps that actually took place. These are the remedies that could have been put in place and to avoid this problem and weren't. And there's good reason why we would have these regulations in place, because we all know how social media works. And I'm sure there's been a lot of negativity about all of this that is spread throughout the food truck community, and it is disappointing that several have left. But I don't know that it's because they feel like they've been overregulated or they just heard these rumors. I don't have an answer to that. Steve.
Well, and I think more looking into it, I think smaller communities, from what I'm hearing now, is that these are regulations that were not able to be put into place that we now have, and we put into place. And some of the smaller communities might not have done it. Where my hang up is and we talk about Josh in particular with his pizza oven, and I can't confirm it without actually going and seeing whether he's done it or not, but Josh is leaving the community to go to Denver where he can run this, and I just have a hard time to see how, and don't take this wrong, because the comment I'm gonna make is gonna probably come out wrong, but I just don't see where you have a community as big as Denver, and we have the answers here as far as, regulation is what we need to. I'm all about safety, but you have a community like Denver that doesn't seem to have a problem with it, then what makes it so different? Where is the difference at between our community and some places as big as Denver? That's the question that I'd like to know.
Exactly, and that's it. I mean, mostly I'm just asking, I don't know how, but like that we conduct research of somehow are we more restrictive, or is it just something out of our control and food trucks are just going to not choose Casper?
And again, it could very well be that, that's coming from Josh. We can't confirm that, and, he could just say he's able to go down there and run it. And
correct.
Maybe he's not. We don't know the answer to that.
We have had a number of food trucks that have given up business in Casper, and so that's why I asked if anyone wanted to suggest that we examine the code to see if there was a need to make some changes. I wasn't suggesting that we should or we shouldn't, but that would be the only way to look at these things, would be to entertain some kind of a change that might loosen up these regulations. Steve?
I think just to be clear on it, that I'm all about safety. If it needs to be done because of safety, then I'm all about that. I think the biggest thing is that tired of seeing businesses leave because the perception is maybe we're over-regulating, whatever. That's what we want to look at, not necessarily the safety end of things.
Exactly.
Because I'll be the last person to sit here and say, nope, you should amend it, and next thing you know, something burns down, everybody points the finger at me, and I'm not going to do that.
Well, there are things we could do. I'll just say this, we could, for example, we could have a public hearing and allow anybody to come forward to tell us why they feel that our food truck policies are inappropriate or too restrictive. Bob?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I kind of agree, if we're looking at this and we're, a relatively small city and Denver finds it acceptable, I think there's something structurally wrong here. And I guess I would like to work with John and see if I can get an amendment that might address some of those kind of issues. And I might want to talk to people in Denver or something before I do that, but I may offer an amendment if this comes before council again.
Chris, and then Ken.
I would suggest that maybe we spent 40 or 50 years of our lives having a public hearing about this last year with food trucks. None of us have any more insight on fire and fire behavior, well, most of us, than the people we pay to do it. And I don't see how we can have an application on motorized vehicle and not a trailer. If there's some questions to be answered, maybe Denver didn't apply the 2018 code, and we did.
It's possible.
Maybe it can be as simple as that, so.
Ken, and then we'll have to make a decision here.
41 states adopted this code. That's what, when I did my research, that's what came as 41 states. Wyoming was one of the states. It didn't give me a list of the states, and I didn't really spend very long to try to find which states did. But as you mentioned, Denver may not have adopted that code, so that's why. But I know 41 states did adopt the code, so they are doing the same thing that we are.
Okay, would any of the rest of you that have some concerns about all of this want to make a proposal? Bob's suggesting he may propose an amendment. Anything else before we move on? Okay, sounds like you may have some support for that, we'll see. Okay. Any other comments on food trucks? Okay, let's move on to Patsy. Thank you guys for coming in and explaining those things.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, council will recall the last time we visited with Catsy, it was to talk about the possibility of extending some funding additional to the, the budgetary extension that takes place already with regard to the recruitment process for the new director, which spurned an invitation from council to come back and visit more broadly about budget concerns and the budget as it's being presented and so on. When initially that invitation was discussed, I thought it would be a two-pronged discussion. One about the disparity in the current budget and one about the proposed budget for fiscal year 20. I'm happy to report that the CATSI staff and our staff worked together to rectify the issues for the current budget. And so the need to talk about FY19 as it relates to what we thought would be a fairly sizable discrepancy does no longer appear to be an issue, which I'm very, very thankful for. I thank you for that. I appreciate that. However, it would help to talk about the fiscal year 20 budget. And as you'll see in the materials they're presenting this evening, which you have had over the weekend and probably have read through, there is an increase with regard to both the contributions from the general fund side and the 1% side. Remembering, of course, that a portion of the 1% allocation will be dedicated to the tokens and tickets program that CDBG no longer funds. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, if I could turn time over to the CATSI staff to walk us through those budgetary issues, that would be great.
You're on.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Councilors, Manager Napier. I'm John Jones, the new Executive Director of CATSI. Plus, does anybody need any printed material? Do you have them all? Okay, cool. I have some schedules here that we can pass around and some rules. I'd like to take one just so you have some basics. Presentation tonight really focuses around some of the basic information that we feel council would like to know about CATSI and the bus and our relationship with the city. So, who has the clicker? Here you go. Thank you. See if I can mess this up. So, in 1982, of course, we, with the city's assistance, we brought 3 separate transportation providers together to form CATSI as it is now. You folks, the city of Casper, are the designated recipient for our federal operating funds, which are formula funds and controlled by some factors, population being one of them. That's why those funds are remaining relatively flat and have remained relatively flat through the years. Just a quick rundown there. They're population based and some operations based. In order to draw down funding, you have to match it with exactly what the federal government funds, which right now this year is a little over $1,024,000. We're a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. We have no physical assets. We derive no income.
Our sole mission is to provide transportation to members of the general public, elderly, disabled individuals using mobility devices, youth, and transportation disadvantaged in and around the community. We're combined dial-a-ride, which is the cat seat component. That would be the cream-colored, orange, and purple striped buses that you see running about, and then the bus is the white buses with the banner on the side that operates fixed route transportation. Anyone who needs transportation can pay a fee. It's all detailed in the brochures. Our scope of service is within the urbanized areas here within Casper, Barnum, Natrona County. Fares and hours of operation are set by all of you. You own most of the fleet. The city of Casper owns most of the fleet. Mills and Evansville own a couple of buses for their services. The city's fleet garage does all of our repairs. Just goes over some basics with the door-to-door buses that provide service to passengers who call at least 2 days in advance, and we pick them up right at their door. Fixed route buses stop at the designated stops. 6 scheduled routes, Casper, Mills, and Evansville on the bus. 6:30 to 6:30 on weekdays, 7:30 to 3:30 on Saturday, and we don't do anything on Sunday. How we're funded. Again, the city through the MPO provides 50% of the operating funding for the system. The federal government provides the other 50% through the federal 5307 program, which is the urban formula program. We split our operating funding a little bit. The 50-50 funding goes to operation, and then we have some 80-20 funding that pays a portion for our maintenance on the buses. Casper, Mills, Evansville, Wyandotte, Barnum, Natrona County, and some of our service contracts are all partners in this organization, providing a portion of that match for that federal funding. Mills and Evansville pay the full cost for their services through federal funding obtained through the state of Wyoming and the match that they provide for the two communities. The local match provided by Casper comes from 1 cent and general fund contributions approved annually by all of you, and we appreciate that. Fares aren't eligible as contributions to the match. Those are considered non-eligible incomes. The board adopts a new operating and capital budget each year, and that budget sets out the projected costs of providing the anticipated scope of service through the contract that we have with the city. Our budget includes all costs for operations, administration, personnel, bus repair, maintenance, everything you would consider in a transportation operation. We pay fees to the city for maintenance and repair of buses, fuel, and tires. We have no separate income stream. Foundation funds, approximately $161,000 are invested. There is a portion of that corpus which we cannot touch by the bylaws. It stays in a trust fund, and we're able to draw down the interest of that. Approximately $43,000 of that is interest unencumbered as of the first of the month. Historically, we've worked to maintain the total budget based on the amount of federal and local match available annually. So we definitely keep our operations streamlined and lean to operate within the funding that can be provided. However, I've got to tell you, costs are going to go up. A couple of factors are we need to begin to look at the market base for the wages for our drivers. We're hearing reports from around town that there are several jobs in maintenance and other fields that pay nearly as much as our drivers make with a heck of a lot less responsibility. So that's one escalating cost that we know we're going to face moving forward. The cost of repairs of our buses is probably going to go up. As you probably heard from Marge in the previous year, we're now required by the federal government to have a transit asset management plan, and they have changed the parameters on the life cycle of a lot of our equipment namely the buses. We used to keep our buses 5 to 7 years. That's what they are rated by, were rated by the federal life cycle that's determined by some, an institute called the Bus Testing Institute in Altoona, Pennsylvania, that basically their job is to wear buses out so that they can see how long they should last. The buses that we currently operate are 5 to 7 year units. We're now being required by the government to keep them for 10. Repair costs are gonna go up because things are gonna start wearing out, and we're gonna start to experience repairs that we previously haven't experienced because we were getting rid of the buses well before it became time to make those type of repairs. You know, we will probably, you know, we do go through a lot of transmissions, but we'll probably start seeing engines go bad and seeing major body repairs come onto the scope of what we have to look at moving forward, because we're going to be keeping these units 3 to 5 years longer than we normally would keep them. The annual contract, of course, that we have with the city outlines the scope of services. It outlines how much money we get through the federal government this coming at the end of this fiscal year 18-19. The federal amount received is about $1,008,000. That contract includes the amount of local match commitment from the general fund in 1 cent. Right now it's $513,672. And then it sets out our financial obligation to the city to turn over $362,654 that we get from our other funding partners, that flows through the city's operations budget to fund the portion of that match that they've declared. CATC and the city of Casper have separate lease agreements for rent on our city-owned buildings over on East 4th Street, the garage, the administrative offices, and also the fleet of buses. Here's just a summary of some of the overall expenses that we've experienced, and shows how they are up and down over the years, beginning in with fiscal year 2013-2014. The orange, hopefully this is showing up for you. The orange is the CATC operation. The yellow, of course, is the bus fixed route operation. As you can see, the expenses have gone up and down over the years. They went down a little bit in 16 and 17, and 17 and 18. As I understand it, there was some service cut in those years, so that was the reason for the reductions in expenses. As you can see here, they are headed back up in 18 and 19, and headed up a little further in the projected 19-20 budget. Didn't put together a chart on this because it got a little busy, but here are a summary of the revenue contributions from each organization over the years 13 to 19. As you can see here with your funds, 1 cent, and the general fund. The general fund has been up and down throughout the years. It started up here, and since 15-16, it was $200,000 straight across the board. Then I understand that these two actually flipped here. That this year is actually $200,000, and the general fund is $313,000. But and then projected in 19 and 20, $243,000 general fund, $365,000, 1 cent. Here are our projected federal amounts here. You can see they're very close in these 2 years. This is these 2 years here, this represents a full drawdown. As you saw in the last slide, I said $1,008,960. That's what is currently showing on the budget to be drawn down. But this is the total available, $1,024,312. Next year, $1,024,464. Again, that's all population based, so it's remaining relatively flat. The Mills Evansville fixed route contribution from the 2 towns has been flat across the board, as have the other amounts, and both the YDOT contributions for this $109,529 is the fixed route contribution that Mills and Evansville obtained from YDOT, and then the $111,423 is the CATC contribution obtained from YDOT. Natrona County again, is 13,500. They're considering an increase for 2019, 2020. I don't think, yeah, there is, service contracts again have remained relatively the same. And then here you have your annual totals. As you can see, they have fluctuated, reaching a high point in 15, 16, and then beginning to come down a little bit as we move through the years. Here are the bus fixed route revenues. These are the ones that fund bus fixed routes. You can see on the chart. City of Casper operating, and Casper 1% are nearly as large as the FTA contribution, and the other partners commensurate small amounts. This program here, this FTA JARC, that was discontinued in 2016. That stands for Job Access Reverse Commute. That program was discontinued when the FAST Act was passed back in 2016. And here are the dollar ride revenues for Cat C. Again, sorry, these aren't quite lining up. 40% of the overall funding comes from the FTA. Nearly 40% of the funding for that Cat C operation, actually almost a total 40% comes from the city of Casper, 1% and general fund. And here are the passenger trips for 2018, for the bus service for 2018. Again, the bulk of them, to nobody's surprise, is in the city of Casper. With a little bit from Mills and Evansville. And then here are your dollar ride passenger trips. Again, the bulk of them are city of Casper and the other partners involved, the county, bar none, Evansville, and the town of Mills. That's the end of the presentation as far as it goes. As I stated earlier, moving forward, to no one's surprise, we're going to be facing escalating costs. Bus repairs are going to go up, wages or we're going to have to examine wages. We don't know what we're facing with regard to in repairs. We don't know what we're facing with regard to where fuel prices may go. We know oil costs are going up. We're watching them very closely. Last month they went up, gasoline went up 9% and diesel fuel went up 13%. On national averages, so we know that those costs are going to increase, and we don't really have any control over that. The changes that were suggested prior to me coming here for efficiency will be implemented next month on the 3rd. They will save us a little bit of money, not a great deal. We may have to look a little bit deeper. I think that I've been looking at the long-range transportation planning stuff that the MPO had started that process prior to me coming here. I think what that's going to trigger for us is the need to look at transit a little bit deeper in the form of what's called a transit development plan process. That may suggest some changes that need to be affected over the coming years, but by and large, as I move about through the community and talk with various groups and various people, what I hear is we would like to see it expanded. We would like to have longer hours. We would like to have greater frequency on routes. Unfortunately, all those things mean greater costs, but it also means greater service to the members of the community and your constituents. So that's really all I have tonight. Does anybody have any questions, any comments?
Questions for John?
Chris? Looks like then on your chart there, we're looking at about $95,000 total, 52 out of 1 cent and 43 out of general fund for
Yes.
our contribution. And that'll maintain the service that we have now. So if the other contributing entities aren't able to put in, they just reduce service. Is that Fair statement, or?
That would be really all that we could do.
Okay.
Other questions for John? My question is about the status of our fleet. If I'm getting this, by extending the length of time before they need to be retired, it's almost like it gives you some breathing room until they reach that 10-year, but then some significant costs, I assume, at that point, because we would have. Could you tell us how old our buses are and when you would?
Our
when we need
average,
to-
the average age of our fleet right now is about 4.6 years, so and it's in really good shape. I have, you know, I told Mr. Napier and Mr. Clokey the other day, and Ms. Becker as well, your fleet garage does an absolutely fantastic job of maintaining those buses, keeping them in safe condition. Their focus is on preventive maintenance. We don't see a lot of major failures. The two big major failures that we do see, or the one big major failure that we do see right now, is we use an awful lot of transmissions. In stop and go driving, there's an awful lot of shifting. It's a fairly large vehicle. We do have some problems with front ends, but you know, that's just the nature of the business. But for the first time since anyone can remember, and again, I haven't been here that long, we had to have major engine repairs done on one the other day. And unfortunately, as they get a little older and get a little bit more mileage on them, those are the things you're going to see. You know, they're not passenger cars, but frankly, the chassis that our buses are built on aren't much larger than passenger cars. You know, we have Fords and Chevrolets, and the engines and transmissions that they're supplied with are just what you would get in your Ford truck or your Chevrolet truck if you went out to one of the companies here that sells those two products and bought them. You'd have the same drivetrain basically. And so as we move forward and they get past what has been their suggested life cycle, which was 5 to 7 years on the equipment that we operate, now they're going to push us out to 10. We're probably going to see those larger repairs come to play. Again, your shop does a good job. I don't expect that we'll see a lot of it, but we will see some more than we have had, simply because we have to keep them longer. That's an issue I intend to take up with the state later on this year as I get more acquainted and get to know people better. It was a fight I fought at my last job in another state, and we were able to get them to knock it down to 7 years, which is, you know, keeps us from those increasing costs. But right now they're stuck on 10 years, so I'll see what I can do.
Are any of our buses approaching that 10-year, John?
We have 2 buses that probably, if they hadn't changed the criteria, would have been replaced next year. Now they're going to be here for 3 more years. The Mills and Evansville buses were due to be replaced this year. They're now going to be here until 2022. And they are approaching 200,000 miles.
Okay. Mike?
2 questions. Are they like an F600 or 550, roughly?
450s.
450s. But are they operating within their GBW rating?
Yes.
Kristen?
Just for my clarification, this was more just like a informational, like kind of like make us more familiar with CATSI. We'll talk about like actual like numbers and things like that in the future at a different time. I'm a bit okay.
And so we're not surprised or unprepared when we see some other things coming our way.
Perfect.
There'll be a few numbers coming.
Any other questions for John? Thank you for all your work. Thank you guys. for
Thank you
coming.
very much, John, for your
Thank
time.
It was
Thank you for
interesting.
letting us do CATSI 101. We appreciate the opportunity.
I would just point out the bar graphs were interesting to me because it shows what Marge and Carol had told us, that the initial bump where there was a weighting toward using of the bus worked very well, but now we're seeing a shift back towards dial-a-ride as people age and more infirm people need that door-to-door assistance, if that's the, and I see the bar graph sort of shows those trends, so it looks like we'll see more of that down the road.
We probably will.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And you did it in one tank.
Moving right along is Judge Lynn here? There you are, okay. My peripheral vision isn't what it used to be, so let's talk a little bit about the municipal court. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. I just wanted to come in and do an update. We just got our Omni audit completed, and what we're looking at as far as that goes is a proposal of $233,149.85 to be written off. That's from the old system to Justware, which is our current system. We're gonna move into collections, $61,838.84. That's what my staff will, between now and July 1st, be moving over into Justware, and then we're going to begin collections on those amounts. The numbers were generated. We looked at the age of the case, where the person was located, total amount due, restitution, if that was included in those, ability to pay the defendant, Department of Corrections records, and of course whether the individual was deceased. We're kind of moving towards a new sort of policy where we look at when I'm assessing fines, restitution, those sorts of things. We're looking very closely at the financial ability of the defendant. If they're telling me they can't pay, we set another hearing and bring them back so that they can show me they can't pay. We're trying to assess fair fines, restitution, that sort of thing. And then we intend to vigorously pursue those instead of letting them sit out idle, so that we can get those collected. My goal is to get down case numbers within inside a year so that we know everything outside of the year has extenuating circumstances, but everything needs to come in less than a year as far as age goes. I'm auditing all of the old cases. We have some that are like 1900 days old. So I'm auditing all those to get those down. Some are adjudicated, some aren't. We're just trying to figure out what, now that I got this Omni thing kind of taken care of, I'm going to focus on all of our outstanding cases. We just started helping to verify insurance. We got a Verisol account to kind of help the police department out as far as the administrative duties. If somebody comes up, if the police department has a line, we're going to help try to take care of some of those things to kind of share the burden a little bit better. Parking tickets, we're working with the Natrona County Treasurer to figure out a way. We're getting inundated with summonses where we're not sure that people were correctly served, so we're trying to work out some alternatives to issuing summonses. Right now, we do have the opportunity to put liens on titles. That could be a number of years before we see anything on that, so we're working with them currently. We talked to Mr. Doyle, and he's working with YDOT and then the county attorney to figure out what some other options might be to help us out there. Last week we attended the municipal court conference in Jackson, and I'm excited to tell you that next year it'll be here. I made a good pitch with the help of Visit Casper to get that here next year. I was elected as the vice president. Both of my clerks are on the education committee, so we're looking to do a really top-notch conference next year for everybody. Try to expand that to bring a lot of people into Casper this time next year. We're going to be sending out letters of interest for speakers starting this week to kind of get some feel as to what Casper has to offer as far as speakers, and then we'll send that back to the overall committee and let them kind of discuss that as far as speakers. Right now we have it kind of, the Ramcota has a really good facility set up for us. They've made a proposal well and under budget for the municipal court conference, so we're looking at them and going to verify that they're going to be the ones to take that. The Governor's Council for Impaired Driving, our probation officer Lauren went to that also this last week, and it was a really great conference, as it usually is. I was unable to attend that because I wanted to go and make the pitch for Casper, but I was asked to be on that board, and so my first meeting with them is tomorrow, which I will be participating in that to kind of get Casper well in the mix on the city as far as that board goes. So, and we've also been working with the mission to kind of focus on our indigent population, try to get some rehabilitation. They have a lot of great programs, and so we're working closely with them. And then we are, we do have a couple of public intoxicated individuals that have been repeat offenders that we have successfully gotten into treatment and are doing very well. So those are kind of the strides that we're making, and so I'm very pleased with the way things are going.
Questions for Judge Lund? For Kristen and Chris.
Do you sleep?
Sometimes.
I would just say great work.
Thank you.
Chris?
Did you say you were the vice president of the Municipal Judges Association?
Yes.
And you're gonna be on the Governor's Council for Impaired Driving?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Questions, Mike?
Do you have any questions you want to ask the council?
Did you have something? Did I say something at some point?
I just want to know.
No.
If there's anything you want to ask us.
No, I don't want to.
Okay.
I don't think at this time. I just kind of want to give everybody an update of what we're doing. Since
Anytime you see a lawyer ask that question.
yeah, that's a loaded question. Am I supposed
No, I do not.
Do you have any questions?
You're the only person who doesn't have questions for council.
Well, thank you for the update. It sounds like things are going well.
Yep, they are.
Appreciate your work.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, moving on to the annual audit. Carter?
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, you should have received the annual audit, actually, as I understand it, twice now. Once after it was first delivered and once as a part of this packet. I realize that the reading isn't all that exciting, and so I would certainly understand if, you know, you didn't have a lot of question into some of the detail of that audit, but to give you the punchline, if you will, with regard to what it says, I'm happy to report that you have an unqualified audit in front of you, which would suggest that there are no concerns that they have that would require them to provide some sort of a bridge recommendation as to what it is that we're doing from a financial standpoint. And so, as far as it relates to the stewardship of the city's funds and public dollars and so on, I think we have great improvement. There's a couple things that you've probably noticed in some of the management comments that we could work on, and we're going to continue to do so. Mr. Pitlick and his team have made significant strides over the last 18 months with regard to some of the concerns that Mr. Pitlick found when he came in to the job and to the office that he's in. And I'm just real pleased with regard to what you see and what you have in front of you. I would say that the timing with regard to the receipt of the audit is concerning. Typically, we like to have those audits at the end of the calendar year. And as you can see, we're far past that at this point in time. But we've talked to the vendor, the consultant, our auditing team with regard to those issues, and we hope that next year you'll get that delivery much sooner and have the beginning of the calendar year to sort of begin your analysis for the new budget with those data in front of you. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, if you have other questions, we'd be happy to entertain them, probably more like Mr. Pitlick entertaining them, and we can go from there.
So in the back there, we talked about material weakness. Those are areas that we need to bring up to speed. And I see some of them date back to 17, so you know, as I go through and I read the explanations on them, I won't pretend to understand everything we've got in there, but it looks like we've got some training that we need to do with the Government Accountability Office, and so we won't see these next year, right?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, a lot of the changes that we recognized needed to be done, you helped us along the way in that you gave us some positions, or I should say a position, that will enable us to do a lot of the centralizing of the accounts payable and receivable and so forth. That will enable us to get beyond a number of those weaknesses. One of them that probably won't go away, perhaps with the next audit, is with regard to the CPA requirement. We call it the CPA requirement, wherein they generally ask for someone who has that level of distinction within staff as being one qualified to review and those kinds of things. And so, while we do have 2 folks who are on track now with regard to some of the hires that we've had the opportunity to make, we think that those will be dealt with, maybe not in this coming audit, but certainly in the following one when those certifications have been achieved. And in my estimation, that should take away a lot of those training expectations that you might have referenced there.
Thought we had a CPA.
We've got a, Mr. Mayor, Council, we've got a CPA candidate currently. Was Mr. Gunderson a CPA? He was not a CPA, okay. So probably the last CPA we had was with Mr. McDonald, I would say.
Okay.
But could I ask Mr. Pitlick to add to that if I could? And the-
Sure. Mayor, Council, in regard to that thing, a couple things. The position I've done before, this is not the first time I've seen this finding. And it's complicated in that the auditors typically do not want us to prepare the financial statements because they have a mechanism, we download the trial balance to, and then they do everything from there. And that is the case here as well. I've specifically asked the auditors if they want us to prepare the financial statements, and they prefer to have them in their hands and put them together the way they're used to seeing it. So that is one issue. I have gone around this before, and their concerns, and able to demonstrate to them that we do have the competence to understand the conversion from the regular accounting to the government-wide statements. And that involved conversations with previous auditors to set up some testing, if you will, but design some practices that we can do to demonstrate to them that we know how to handle this. So it's kind of a transition period. My other place of appointment, we did not have CPAs on it, and we had clean audits with no issues. So to me, it's a matter of working with these auditors and getting that level of understanding and getting that level of comfort with us. As Carter mentioned, we've done had some opportunities for some turnover in the staff, and I think we've made some very good hires in that regard. If you don't know Evan Condelario, sitting at the end there, we hired him as the accounting and budget supervisor, and he brings a wealth of knowledge to the organization, and he is going through a very rough initiation process with learning the old system, learning the new system, and by the way, here's the budget.
In your spare time.
Tom, I wonder if it might be helpful for council for you to talk a little bit about the transition to the software system and some of the benefits that you think that will.
Absolutely, that's going to be that component of it. You gotta realize the system we're working on now is a platform that's 20 years old. The new system will allow us the ability to actually generate more financial reports in the format that the auditors are used to be seeing. Right now, our general ledger, our account numbers, don't even have the numbers we need to make this conversion to the government-wide statements. So I anticipate that's one of the reasons I was really a proponent of the new software system, is to bring us up to a newer platform that cities across the country use. It's been proven, we worked with it, and it's gonna be a great asset to
Did you tell Mr. Condelario that we had a 20-year-old software system before he came on board, or was that something you told him about later?
I don't think anybody told me either, so.
I think Kristen, were you waiting, and then we'll get to Chris.
Oh, sorry.
Were you waiting?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So just really quick, because I actually had the same questions. I was looking through the findings, and I was like, well, I wonder how we're going to go about some of these. I can't seem to figure out the page number. There is the corrective action plan where I'm assuming the majority of your team has put in writing, you know, what they're going to do to fix the problems that have been identified and when they will have that completed by. So it kind of creates that accountability of if they say they're going to have it fixed by next June, at some point we should probably follow up and make sure it's fixed by next June. The only other thing I'd say is the CPA thing is strange, and the reason I say that is CPA is certified public accountant, which obviously, as you can guess, has nothing to do with government accounting necessarily. It's a very difficult exam. You have to have a year of public experience to even if you pass the test, you still have to have a year of public experience in order to receive that designation. And the CPA license encompasses basically every aspect of accounting, which, as you can imagine, is a little broad. It's not specific to government accounting or financial statement preparation. So I agree. I think there's got to be a way that we can show competence without a designation that's really not specific to what's being required of us anyways.
Absolutely, and I agree, and I have great admiration for CPAs, but government accounting is its own unique
Exactly.
glitch there, and I think maybe Evan can attest to that government accounting doesn't necessarily, the thought process isn't the same. A lot of things that make sense in the private sector do not work in the government world. But we are going through the training. We are beefing up the training. We've had visits with the auditors already as far as getting things structured a little better. And certainly we'll be working on them for a model to go forward and to alleviate this finding. I detest audit findings, and will pledge that we will work diligently to make sure that those do not appear again. And just one other comment about that. When I came on, they were just starting the fiscal 17 audit, and I was told that there were going to be findings in the audit that were not present in previous audits, although the condition was still there. So I just put that out there so that it's not like these things just appeared. It's that the auditors follow the auditing standards. There are some things that hadn't risen to the level of a significant finding that they felt now it should be. So they're not new, they're just newly reported. And again, we made progress from last year. I think last year there were 6 findings, we're down to 4, and hopefully next year we'll do a little more.
Anything else, Chris?
I've actually, through the rumor mill, heard a lot of good things about you, Evan. Must be doing a good job. With the new system, it's hard to believe that the old one's 20 years old. We have a horrible history from Wapasaw land of only buying the bare bones of any new system, and then we fail from the very beginning. So if this thing needs modules that you're apprehensive to bring funding or request funding for or something like that, or that make it the entire operation better, please bring it forward. Not the bare bones where you'll fight it for 20 years and find out that you can't even update it.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I appreciate that. Thank you. That's very
Any
helpful.
other questions for Tom or for Evan or Carter? I'd just like to point out, Bob and I represent council on the finance committee, and the auditors at several points talked about how cooperative our finance staff was and how they went the extra mile to provide information, and had nothing but compliments for our staff. So thank you very much for all of your work on that. I know there's a lot to it.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on then. Let's talk about our draft budget distribution. Carter?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, those of you who were here for last year's proceedings at this time probably recall receiving a draft budget document along the lines of what we distributed to you over the weekend, or did we get it for tonight? Did we distribute it with the document?
It was, I do have extra copies here.
Okay.
If anybody needs.
So we do have some hard copies on hand if you'd like it. The bottom line with regard to the document that you're receiving tonight or electronically over the weekend is that this is in no way meant to be your final budget document. This is only the statutorily required delivery that we are supposed to give you on a very preliminary basis. And so my hope is that your thirst for knowledge and information will be comforted to know that you will get oodles amounts of additional information that will comprise a formal delivery of your budget. And we anticipate that being actually Monday night in our first budget-related work session. And so this really just meets the bare bones of what the state asks us to do on a very preliminary basis, and you will have your full budget next week. Along those lines, as it relates to the presentation of your budget next week, you'll remember and are probably seeing on your agenda that we have actually 2 nights set aside for next week's deliberation of the budget. The first night, which would be Monday night, as I've mentioned, is the primary delivery, the primary discussion, sort of the overall view. You'll get the full budget message. And that actually begins your formal deliberations of the budget for the next 25 to 30 days. Pursuant to that, there will be questions and stuff that we need to discuss and dialogue we need to have and all those kinds of things. But in regards to the delivery that you would like to see, I've seen it done in just a multiple variety of ways. Last year, we dealt with a number of the broader range issues. We went through a lot of the delivery discussion the first night, and on the second night reserved it for follow-up questions and follow-up dialogue and those kinds of things. If council would like to see that approach for this next week, that's wonderful. If you, however, would like to have a more detailed approach than what you saw last year, and obviously not everybody will remember that, we can do that too. We can have each department come in and give you a rundown of their department level budgets. We can go further with division level budgets. We can again use Wednesday night as a follow-up. Whatever you would like, we'd be happy to do. And so if council can give me that kind of bare bones direction this evening, that'd be great.
Comments? Requests?
I'd be comfortable with department annual reports if they've created them.
Okay.
Yep.
Anybody have an alternative view here of how to prepare for this? Okay. Good enough?
Very good.
I guess you got your question answered.
And so just to be clear, in the budget workbook, if you will, that you'll get, there will be a lot of that data contained in there. If as you go through it, whether it be Monday and Wednesday next week or days subsequent to those formal discussion opportunities, we have a lot of time in between that we can bring things up and talk about them in the interim, preparing you for your formal consideration, which would be in the middle of June.
Okay. Good enough. All right. If there aren't any other comments, we'll move on to wage and compensation discussion.
Mr. Mayor, I'm gonna excuse myself from the conversation and from the rest of the meeting because I imagine you guys will be able to have the agenda reviewed just fine. I would request the flags for patriotic holidays be put on there sooner than later if we could, though.
Is that on our list now?
It's just on the potential for future
as far as
agendas.
putting it on the agenda.
Discuss that.
All right, we'll work that in. Okay. We all got some information in our packets about the wage and compensation discussion, so I guess we can talk about all that, Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is our opportunity to look at wage and compensation in a bit of a different light, if you will. The concern that I've mentioned to you before, that we've had some conversation about actually preceding this council as well, relates to ways in which we can look at performance and ways we can look at compensating performance and those kinds of things. One of the other things that you've heard me mention in both, sort of verbal discussion as well as in writing is with regard to ways in which we can improve the retention opportunities for employees who have gotten outside of their original wage band and have capped out, as it were, and are lacking opportunities to improve financially. I think that we've got a really good model with regard to buying that performance, not necessarily looking at a pay-for-performance type program, but nonetheless still gaining value-added benefit with regard to the contributions our employees make, while finding that balance of rewarding that value-added contribution in the form of the way in which we structure advancement opportunities, job opportunities throughout the organization. Some of our departments have already figured out that balance very well. The fire department is one, and if any of you are familiar with that union contract, you'll remember the portions dedicated to those types of opportunities. The water department and the department dealing with sanitary sewer and so forth, Casper Public Utilities, have figured out another way as well, wherein certifications are built into their advancement with regard to these responsibilities that they get to take on as they advance, and they're compensated accordingly. And by the way, I think it's really important to note, it's really impressive to see the amount of level 4 operators that we have within the organization. That's a very good thing for an organization of our sophistication and scope and everything else with the regional services we provide. The police department has put together a model as well with regard to things that they would like to incorporate. And we have the opportunity to hear from the chief in regard to his ideas as also that I think creates another opportunity for employees in our organization. That where, if implemented, those value-added services can be awarded with regard to those who are willing to make those commitments, and the citizens and the department and the organization receive benefits in return. And to me, that's really the spirit of what buying performance is all about. And it doesn't depend upon the subjective review that spans a number of organizations in a complex function like the city of Casper, where there are myriads of management styles as well. And so I am pleased to suggest that the police department's model, the fire department's model, and what we see in some of the utilities are really good ways in which we have accomplished that balance, or could accomplish that balance. I would suggest, however, though, that there are also other departments in the organization that really need this kind of model applied to as well. And so my hope is that we don't stop with regard to what we're talking about tonight or what we've already accomplished, and that indeed council authorize staff to continue that analysis, continue this implementation, and see if we can't find that right balance across the organization, not just in public safety, not just in utilities, but throughout the operation. The other thing that I would suggest is another step that probably ought to be taken as well. And this step brings, I'll just tell you in advance, a lot of controversy, a lot of debate, a lot of calls to council from employees and so forth. And that's in the form of conducting a class and comp study, which hasn't been done in this organization for probably 6 or more years. Generally speaking, you want to do it every 4 or 5 years, 3 years probably at the most. But I would say that with regard to a lot of the data that we're probably missing in this analysis, a good class and comp study would indeed fill in those blanks and therefore provide us that missing data, provide us the other things that we probably need to know, and to help us to continue our analysis of the variety of things that come with regard to managing a competitive organization that can weather the storm in our particular part of the country of an intensifying energy economy. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we have really two requests of you this evening. One is with regard to the authority to move forward in implementing programs throughout the organization for, again, finding that balance of compensating performance and receiving value-added services, along with the possibility of doing a class and comp study that you will see in your budget here soon.
Questions, comments? Steve?
So, I had the opportunity to be able to sit down with the chief and yourself and Councilman Walsh and discuss the police department's plan. I think it's a great plan, and I have no problem in moving forward with that. The fire department has been in place for quite some time, but I guess my question is, I really don't want to give the go-ahead to move forward on something that the rest of the organization, I can't tangibly see in front of me as to how that's going to work out. I would prefer to see that once every portion of the organization, once you figured out exactly how that wage and comp is going to take place, I'd rather see that in front of me and not. I just prefer not to give the go-ahead until I actually see that. I don't know if anybody else feels the same way, but I had the opportunity to sit down and talk about the police department. I don't know if anybody else at the table has, but I'd prefer to be able to do exactly that, have a discussion about each of them before I give the thumbs up. So I would give the thumbs up on the police department tonight because I've been there, done that. I don't know, again, I don't know who else around the table feels comfortable in doing that, but for the rest of the organization, I don't feel comfortable because there's nothing in front of us. There's no work in front of us to show us what you've done to this point, or if anything's been done to this point, to work on the rest of the organization.
Wow.
Yeah, just for clarification, I understood you to say you were gonna work on this, parts that we don't have assembled yet.
Correct.
So that's the go-ahead. Is that the right understanding, or?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, we would like to continue the analysis throughout the organization. That's correct. And so I do plan to bring back a plan that would say, here's what we'd like to do for parks.
Yeah, okay.
Here's what we'd like to do for recreation. Here's what we would like to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And just to clarify, what I heard was to move forward with it, but also implement. I'm against the implementation portion of it until it comes back in front of us to be able to look at it and give a thumbs up.
But you're okay, if I may, Mr. Mayor, with the analysis continuing from here forward?
Yeah, I prefer that you put it all together and bring it back in front of us so that we can read it. I just don't want to
Okay.
give a thumbs up to implement something that we don't have the opportunity to look at and say whether we agree that that's the way it should be or not. Like tonight, we have this in front of us with the police department. I would give you a thumbs up right now to implement that because I get it. I see how it's gonna work. I don't know if anybody else around the table does, but I do. But the rest of the organization, you have nothing in front of us tonight to tell us how that's gonna look. And so, analysis, absolutely. Information gathering, absolutely. Implementation, I'd give you a thumbs down on that right now. Kristen?
I agree about, it was, I think before I was even on council, I had discussions with an individual who works at the fire department, and this seemed very similar, like from what I remember him talking to me about, like how their compensation structure worked. And so it looked familiar as far as structure. The only thing I'd say, that, I don't know if I want to put the words in the air, but it's going to come. By doing it department by department, we're running the risk of whatever departments are left last. They're going to be like, okay, so these other ones got implemented in mid-2019, but here we are in mid-2020 and our department hasn't even been looked at, or the analysis hasn't even begun. And so by doing it piecemeal, we run the risk of, it's clearly not favoritism, but it will be perceived as favoritism of which ones are getting it quicker and faster and which ones are waiting and waiting. So that'd be the only thing I'd caution us on, is doing it by little chunks.
Other comments, questions? I appreciate your work on this. I've always thought that the system was strange, that people would work for 5 years get a step increase for those first 5 years and then nothing other than cost of living, it seems like a prescription to lose people once they've learned how to do their job.
I agree.
So, Bob?
Charlie, if I might suggest, and I brought this up before, the Employers Council, use them should we choose to do a study. They cover a lot of different things.
Sure.
So, or at least have a proposal from them to talk
So
about.
would you like a thumbs up on both of those requests, Carter? Is that where we are, or what do we need to do tonight?
Mr. Mayor, I think we're tracking right along the lines of where I hope we could go, as it relates to the class and comp study. If council wants more information with regard to what that looks like or what that could be, we could certainly put that together. We're anticipating, if council's comfortable, moving forward probably toward the end of the summer and bringing back data thereafter when the study is complete, of course. But that certainly gives us time to come back again and talk further about what that means and what that looks like and what some of the differences are versus wage and comp and class and comp and versus wage analysis and that sort of thing. So,
I assume there's some costs associated with the study,
absolutely.
so we would need to approve that expenditure.
And
So-
generally speaking, Mr. Mayor, you're gonna see that entry in your budget. And so what I would hope is, at this point in time, council would have the interest enough to keep it in as a placeholder, and then we can follow up from there in terms of kind of creating that scope that this study would include.
Something we would approve when we approve the entire budget. Okay. Any other questions, comments on compensation proposal?
Well, I just do like the idea of being able to, so everybody has the information on what the wage and comp study would do. If we could have more information on that before we vote on that.
Correct.
Moving forward, provide that.
That's the idea.
Hopefully people can have some patience as we work our way through this, and see that there's something happening. Okay, well, that went quicker than, we set aside 60 minutes for that, and it lasted 10, so that's a good thing, and let's try to remember that. The opposite happens, as Sean points out sometimes. Okay, agenda setting, so now we're scheduling our work session topics for June, who can help me with the calendar? First work session in
11th?
June.
June 11th.
June 11th?
June 11th, okay. All right, so take a look at the grid here and see what's on there now. It's pretty much open.
Downtown
So, is everyone okay with discussing downtown flags per Chris's request? How much time do you think we'll need for that?
10 minutes.
Okay. All right. And we're gonna talk about the additional sheet of ice at the rec center on the 11th. That date's already been set, and then budget amendment number 3 review. So we do still have some time available. What's the pleasure, council, as far as the 11th?
Just if I may, Mr. Mayor, just a question on where we stand with the engineering work on the state office building. And I don't know whether that's far enough along for us to get a kind of an update or not, but I would assume that they want to be there shortly, so. I don't know. Food for thought.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, as I understand it, the 95% drawings will be due back to the committee sometime toward the end of the summer.
Okay.
And so,
Much better time then.
we should have a pretty good feel at that point what the design's going to look like and everything else.
Thank you.
I would like to sneak in some time for us to view one of the WHAM training videos. There are about 8 of them, I think, now. The most recent one is the lengthiest one. We might want to save that. And that's the one that Justin put together. Remind me, Carter. It's on Bitcoins. and Wyoming's effort. Cryptocurrency, thank you. So, but we might wanna save that one, cause that's the longest one, but looking for my list here we go. We have, well, there's one called Basic Responsibilities of a Governing Body. These are all about 6 or 8 minutes in length, so we're not talking about a lot of time. There's one on ethics and conflict of interest, that's 6 minutes. Fundamentals of municipal budgeting, 6.5 minutes. Guidelines for the conduct of elected officials, 12 minutes. Legal framework for municipal government, Wyoming Open Meetings Law, Wyoming Public Records Act. And here, I'll just, in fact, we made copies, I don't know why I didn't give these out earlier, so. We should just pass these around, sure. That way everybody will have one. Anybody care to pick one for us to put on the agenda for the 11th?
Well, Mr. Mayor, you mentioned one of these being about ethics, and I was going to suggest that maybe on the 11th, I'd like to at some point have a discussion about whether or not there's interest among the council to try to formulate a workable ethics ordinance.
Well, that is on our proposed topic list as well, so maybe watch the video first.
Good
and
idea.
that'll get us thinking about what should be in a code of ethics.
There you go.
Look at this.
Alright, so we can do that, but again, that won't take up a whole lot of time. Is there any, when would it be appropriate for us to talk about the Davis Street Station, and their proposal to split apart from the DDA? Are those conversations still going on?
Mr. Mayor, I think that discussion is still a discussion. I plan to have some meetings here with a couple of board members actually relatively soon, and I can certainly inquire as to where that might be.
What about the Boys and Girls Club skate park?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, that's a fairly new topic there. Some conversations are underway at this point in time that would hopefully help us formulate a proposal that we would bring forward to the council. And so I would ask for probably a little more time, probably toward the end of the summer, that would come forward as well.
The sign code revisions was on there for some time. That's it.
Yeah, I think the budget amendment's already on.
Mr. Mayor, actually, all of these videos look to me to be kind of interesting. Would there be such a thing as that they could be, would it overload our system to try to forward them out to everybody? Is that technologically doable, or would it?
Well, they're all available on the WHAM website. I would argue for us to do that in our work session so that we can follow that up with a discussion.
And I agree with you. So, never mind about another one of my dumb ideas.
Well, how much time do we have set aside on the 11th? We don't have to go till 8:30 each time. Anything else that is piquing people's interest that they want to be sure we get a chance to talk about? Well, you must be doing pretty good then. So how much time have we set aside on the 11th so far, do you think? About an hour total. We will have done our work this month, so I don't think there's any harm in having a short meeting.
Okay with it.
All right, let's just leave it at that. We'll do that on the 11th, because we've got all these other budget meetings coming ahead, and maybe it'll be okay for us to. So let's watch ethics and conflict of interest on the 11th, and maybe give us another 10 minutes on the agenda to discuss that.
Perfect.
And then that'll tee up us talking about having our own code of ethics, and we do have a proposal that Mr. Henley gave us, I think about a year ago now, as an alternative to the ethics code that we axed, left us with nothing, so. All right. Okay, so, legislative review, we did, have a corporations committee meeting in Casper, yesterday? It was just yesterday, wasn't it?
That's right.
It was just yesterday. And of course, one of the main topics was surface water drainage. And we have, as you all know, have been in the lead pushing for some change in the legislation that would allow us to create a utility. And we had the mayor of Cody come all the way down to argue for that. The county commissioner group stood up for us on this, so I want to note that because we want to really strengthen those alliances with the county commissioner group. Mr. Riemann, is that how we pronounce his name?
Exactly.
Who has Pete Obermiller's, the job Pete Obermiller had, and then Mr. Frazier, the WAM executive director, spoke very competently, as did Representative Sweeney, on the need for us to move forward with this legislation. It was a interesting discussion with a lot of questions, but it did receive the support of the committee with a number of nay votes. So we still have our work cut out for us as we head into the next session. And as you all know, anything that needs to get passed in a budget session needs a 2/3 vote instead of a majority. So there will be an uphill climb because we weren't able to get it through the Senate last time. Anything you want to add to that, Carter? We only talked about state health insurance too, but I'll let you comment on the meeting.
Mr. Mayor, I think it was a productive meeting for cities and towns, and I should appreciate your involvement and the involvement of the other mayors around the state. The conversation with respect to some of the other legislative issues that would come out in the form of resolutions, that comes forward still yet in the summer in Sheridan, and so it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the WAM's docket as it relates to the legislative priorities of the WAM organization and perhaps how they coincide with what we have submitted as well. So I'm looking forward to that conversation.
And I was asked to sit on the resolutions committee, which basically fields requests from the various municipalities to see if there's strong support throughout the state for a given resolution. And I think there was a sense last time, I think we had like 20 or 21 resolutions, and they had a lot of overlap to them. And so David Frazier and I talked about this, and I'm sure he's talked to other people, that to be more focused, we really need to combine these things and really work with a smaller number of resolutions that we can, as a state, really get behind, so that we're not, so that our efforts aren't diluted. So that will be an important part of the Sheridan conference, which I again encourage you all to go to. It's not too late to sign up, and I think you'll find it valuable. Anything else we need to talk about? Legislative updates, Carter?
Do you want to talk about that?
We can talk about the state health insurance plan. I couldn't stay for all of that, but as you all know, we're trying to get a statute in place that would allow us municipalities to join the state pool.
Correct.
And why don't you talk a little bit about what you observed since I was gone?
Okay.
Some of that.
As council may be aware, I sent you an email over the weekend indicating that a favorable opinion came out of the Attorney General's office, indicating that indeed, in his opinion, cities and towns are currently eligible to participate in the state's funded health plan. But, as one of the legislators pointed out in our hearing the other day, just because we have an opinion from an attorney doesn't necessarily make it lawful, even though the attorney's opinion is that it is lawful. So certainly I think there's going to be some debate as to whether or not the legislators believe that this should be open for cities and towns. Certainly from the view of the staff at the state level, they believe that their directive has been given, and so we've got to kind of wait and see how that sort of pans out and boils over.
Support the position.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's the question. What is the position?
And I would ask, John, my understanding has always been that with reference to governmental entities, an Attorney General's opinion has full force of law until it's overruled by either legislation or a court decision. am I recalling something that never existed, John, or am I accurately
I think
recalling?
that's kind of the rule of thumb, so I think you're right, that if you look at that, that you're just kind of waiting for that ultimate ruling from the Supreme Court.
Or the next Attorney General has a different opinion.
Well, but I would say that if we wanna pursue this, you know, we've got that AG's opinion in hand. And with all due respect to what an individual legislator says, you know, I would say that if we wanna do that, let's proceed, but,
Well, Mr. Mayor, I can tell you, councilmen and members of the council, we certainly are beginning our analysis with regard to whether or not the state plan seems like a reasonable alternative to the process and program that we're in currently, which is, as you know, a self-funded sort of approach. There's certainly a possibility that we might find that the state's program just doesn't offer the benefits and advantages that we thought it would, and maybe we'll bring back a recommendation to stay with what we're doing. But nonetheless, we want to have a real thorough investigation, bring you forward the discussion, and in the meantime, in tandem with that, probably what we'll see is the state having a similar discussion about what's appropriate and what's not, and hopefully we don't see legislation that comes out that says we don't want cities and towns to be a part of it, and therefore you are precluded officially. That would be, I think, a bad outcome for this discussion, for cities and towns in general, to not have the option.
Blue Cross spoke very strongly against this. And as you would expect, and of course, with our legislature, there's a strong bias towards free enterprise system and let the market solve these problems, and so it's not an argument that is without merit. So, Bob, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think with what Councilman Huber says, I think we need to be in a position to make the application. That may force a court decision and/or the legislature to do something. So preparation is.
well, and Mr. Mayor, part of what gives an Attorney General's opinion a lot of weight is that in the event that there is a court challenge, it's the Attorney General's office that would be the one that would be making that challenge, and so if the AG's already said this is my opinion, is that it's this way, I would find it very unlikely that an Attorney General would file some sort of an action contrary to what his AG's opinion is.
Good point. And of course, once you adopted it under that current permission, it seems like you would have a lot of inertia with that.
Once we get the camel's nose under the tent.
Anything else on legislation that you talked about? I didn't think of anything. Okay.
What does that mean?
Once the camel's nose is under the tent, he's out.
Oh.
All right, let's counsel around the table. Ken, anything else
Nothing
on
today.
Kristen?
Just a quick question, and unfortunately, I just wasn't able to answer to really find anything to help me give an answer. I don't know how else to word it other than I had a citizen come forward and express the notion that they were under the impression when David Street Station was being put together and being presented to the public as this idea, that their interpretation was that any and all activities open to the public would be free at David Street Station. And it kind of says on their website, I mean, it kind of has similar wording. Obviously, it's not like super defined, but it has similar wording. So the question that was presented was, so things like the ice skating rink had like an admission charge. So like you couldn't just bring your own skates, because obviously like renting skates has like, you're physically like using something, like that's different than like using the facility. But the point that was brought to me was if they were to bring their own skates from home, they still couldn't partake at an event at David Street Station for free as a citizen of Casper. Obviously,
Because of the fee.
correct, because there's an admission fee. I obviously don't know the background of it. I just wanted to present it since it was brought to me, and maybe somebody could, from David Street Station, talk to us about those, like how that was presented, up front and what that looks like going forward, or maybe just to get some clarification before it turns into more than this.
I think if I may, since I was the DDA rep,
Yeah.
I think that, and maybe this should have been made more clear, there are costs associated obviously with running an ice skating rink.
Exactly.
That you don't have with a stage.
Absolutely.
And so they have to have staff there, they
Mhm.
have electricity costs, et cetera. And it really isn't about making money, it's about trying to just cover those costs.
Oh, of course, and I don't think that the
Yeah.
costs were necessarily the question. I think it was just the way that it was initially presented to the public.
And that is true, maybe in their mind it was, the
Well,
police station was
and there's
phase
wording,
one,
there's
which is-
wording on their website that alludes to the citizens' perception as well.
I think their perception was that all events would be free.
Okay,
And maybe that should have been made more clear, that use of an ice skating rink for visitors isn't an event in the same way that having an event at the stage, but that's probably what they would say. Did you wanna add something further to that?
You know, the other thing I might suggest too is there are probably times where an outside entity reserves a use of it, the facility or whatever, and charges a fee for their event. And so there may be those circumstances as well. And so it'd probably help to have the DDA come and address that kind of a question, maybe put together a memo or something.
exactly. I think it just might
Yeah.
And we can get some clarity.
perfect.
Okay. Can you do anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Bob?
Nothing, thank you.
Great.
I don't have anything, just wanted to make clarification for our work session, our budget work sessions next week on Monday and Wednesday. Are we starting at 4:30 for those, or have we made a plan yet? We are doing 4:30?
4:30.
Okay, just want to make clarification, thank you.
Mike?
I will have to ask to be excused Monday and Wednesday next week because I have to travel for a family funeral, but I will be here Tuesday night for the council meeting. The other thing, following up a little bit on Judge Lund's presentation, if anyone has any questions or concerns or anything about municipal court, please direct those either Councilman Johnson or to me because we're working on things related to that.
Steve?
Nothing.
I read a proclamation for Arbor Day today at Park North Casper, and they presented us with this plaque. These stickers, I don't know what they're for, but maybe you would know what they're for, Carter, I don't know. There's a plaque that comes with a brass sticker that you put on the plaque, apparently. It goes along with another plaque that we apparently have somewhere in the building. So, there's that.
Thank you.
And then there's a flag in there. I don't know, but I figure you would know what
Put it in my car.
and that's, I think that's it, that's all I have.
We're moving forward with the establishment of the Disability Council, and I've lost track of when the next meeting is. I know it's coming up soon. And, Fleur, can you send me an email so that I get that squared away? But basically, we have created a process where people are applying to be members of the council. We're establishing a small group of essentially advisors to me to help choose those members of the council. And then we will begin meeting in early June and probably meet once a month to basically establish a strategic plan. Cheyenne has a very active disability council that has apparently done some very good things as far as increasing accessibility in the community and helping people be more aware of the challenges that the disabled population have that most of us wouldn't think about not having those challenges. So we're moving forward with that. Got a chance to address the Rotarians and in their 100, maybe I mentioned that earlier, I can't remember. But then I also mentioned the Visit Casper presentation, which was very positive. We had the director of the Wyoming Tourism, and I forgot her name now.
Ms. Silver?
Yes, who was here, and they gave away awards to several organizations and individuals who have been promoting tourism in Casper. And it was just a very upbeat event with a lot going on, so we're heading into an interesting tourism season, and just want to remind everyone to be nice to our visitors, because that's when they come back and that's when they tell good things about us, and I think we do a really good job with that, but let's keep working at it. So, I think with that, we will need to have an executive session for personnel next week, so we can get that on the agenda for announcement purposes. And, if there be no other business, we will adjourn.
Thanks, everybody.
Just for clarification, it says I'm absent.
We should have said something.
I'd like to point out we're
I
trying
mean, I know I
early.
went the last time, but I am here today.
Okay, we did.
You were correct.
I didn't even, I was like, wait a second.
Right here in the flesh.
Do you mind if I use your phone? I think there's
Yeah, you betcha.
They don't run all the time, you should look at it for you now, different, because you got the lecture, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, my problem is, when you have a system that's right there, you don't kind of
Well, it only triggers if there's a problem.
There you are, sir.
Is what I guess I'm saying. And I can get you, we can send you more information. Because I know what you're saying as far as what you're taking.
and that's what it is.
This is.
Yeah, yeah, nice to meet you. Yeah, hello, nice to meet you.
Degree to rise and
I'm so new, I don't have business cards yet, so once I have that, I will have
If you don't mind, I'll send you some information. Yeah, because like I said, I mean, at some point you will
We try this again.
as far as but like I said, it's typically if something goes wrong.
Yes,
Yeah, I don't know the word.